The summer heat in Iran has always been oppressive, but in July of 2026, the air feels heavier than it has in decades. It's been over 4 months since a devastating dawn airstrike tore through a compound in Tehran, ending the 36-year iron rule of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei on the very first day of the war. For months, as bombs fell and missiles flew and oil tankers burned in the Strait of Hormuz, his body sat and bured, now under the fragile, creaking umbrella of a temporary ceasefire. A massive, week-long funeral procession is snaking across Iran on Iraq, and as the calendar inches toward Thursday, July 9, the tension inside the regime's inner sanctum is reaching levels that no amount of official state television programming can hide. July 9 is the day Khamenei's body will finally be laid to rest at the holy shrine of Imam Reza in Mashhad, the city where he was born, the city where his father is buried. It is a day the regime has spent months preparing for, and it is a day that could either solidify a new era for the Islamic Republic, or trigger the next, most catastrophic phase of this entire conflict. And here's why. Nobody watching this from the outside should be sleeping particularly well tonight. Before we go any further, if this kind of deep, honest analysis is what you come here for, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps more people find this content. Subscribe if you haven't already, because this story is still developing, and you don't want to miss what comes next. Now let's get into it. Let's actually walk through what's happening right now on the ground, because the sequencing matters enormously. The funeral procession began on July 3, with ceremonies scheduled to stretch across 5 cities into countries over 7 days. Tehran first, on July 6, then Qom, on July 7, then across the border into Iraq, to the holiest Shia shrines in Najaf and Karbala, on July 8, before the body comes home to Mashhad for the burial on July 9. Iran is sparing no expense. Highways around Tehran converted into temporary parking zones. Schools, mosques, universities, and sports halls repurposed to accommodate visitors from across the country. The regime is calling this the largest state funeral in Iranian history. They want millions in the streets. They need millions in the streets. Because there's a story Tehran desperately needs to tell the world right now. And every human body standing in that crowd is a sentence in that story. The story goes like this: we took everything you threw at us. We lost our leader. We absorbed your bombs. And we are still here. Still standing. Still the Islamic Republic. But here's the problem with that story. The man who is supposed to be standing at the center of it cannot be there. Iranian security officials have rejected Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei's own request to attend the burial of his slain father, because they fear Israel will kill him, or track him back to his hiding spot. Read that again. Iran's new supreme leader, the man who is technically now the highest authority in the Islamic Republic, has to go to his own father's funeral, and the security apparatus around him said no. His representative to India confirmed it formally due to security reasons. Following Israel's latest threat to assassinate Mujtaba Khamenei, the new supreme leader will not be attending the funeral. That's not a small footnote. That's the centerpiece collapsing. Mujtaba Khamenei, 56, has not been heard from publicly since the start of the conflict in late February. He communicates with supporters only through written statements, never showing his face, never using his voice. For months, the man supposedly running the Islamic Republic has been a ghost. And now, on the single most watched day Iran will have experienced since the revolution, he's not going to be there either. So the regime is going to bury its former supreme leader in Mashhad without its current supreme leader present, in the holiest city in Iran, in front of millions of mourners, and cameras from across the world, with a legitimacy question sitting at the center of the entire ceremony that no amount of carefully choreographed state television coverage can make disappear. And why exactly can't he be there? Because Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz publicly stated that Mujtaba Khamenei is, in his words, marked for death. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi issued a formal warning in response, telling the United States to muzzle its pets in Israel, while Iranian military commanders warned Washington and Jerusalem against any miscalculation in the days surrounding the funeral. The IRGC specifically warned that any miscalculation will be met with a decisive and more crushing response than ever before. That's the Revolutionary Guard of a country in the middle of ceasefire negotiations, loudly telling 2 of the world's most capable militaries to keep their aircraft away from a funeral. Now look at the actual security architecture Iran has built around this event. Iran's civil aviation organization closed Tehran's airspace completely on Monday for the funeral procession through the capital, with no flights permitted. Security personnel have been visibly deployed throughout Tehran, and preparations for similar lockdown as in Mashhad are already underway. According to a former head of Israel's military intelligence, the Iranians have heavily guarded every element of these proceedings because they are aware of threats being considered from both the air and the ground. The appearance of senior IRGC commanders at the Tehran ceremonies in public, in uniform, may itself be a signal that the regime believes its security bubble is holding, at least for now. General Ahmad Vahidi, one of the most powerful commanders of the IRGC, made his first public appearance since February at the funeral ceremonies. He was seen attending a funeral meeting and sitting beside Khomeini's coffin during a small ceremony in Tehran. Prior to this, Vahidi had not appeared in public since February 8, weeks before the outbreak of war. His reappearance is a clear message about the continuity of power during a turbulent transition. But here's the layer nobody's quite connecting properly, and it changes the entire picture. During the initial Tehran ceremonies, Iran had something it won't have on July 9, an invisible layer of diplomatic protection. Representatives from more than 100 countries attended the earlier funeral ceremonies. Delegations from Pakistan, China, India, Iraq, and Russia were present. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev was there. Pakistan sent both its prime minister and its army chief. Iran's foreign ministry thanked these nations publicly for attending despite what it described as pressuring threats, and that international presence mattered strategically in a way that never gets stated explicitly. No adversary, not even one with the operational capability, and the stated willingness launches a strike into a crowd containing dozens of foreign heads of state and senior diplomats. The diplomatic presence was functionally a human shield, whether anyone admitted it or not. By July 9, that shield will be gone. The burial in Mashhad is a domestic religious ceremony. The Pakistani prime ministers and Russian ex-minus presidents will have flown home. The cameras will still be rolling. But the foreign dignitaries who made the earlier Tehran gatherings functionally untouchable will not be standing in the crowd at the Imam Reza Shrine. For anyone doing military or intelligence calculus, the security equation shifts sharply the moment those international delegations depart. And Iran knows it, which is why the security posture around Mashhad on July 9 is reportedly extraordinary. But here's the thing about extraordinary security measures in a country that's been at active war for 4 months. A country whose military and intelligence infrastructure has absorbed strike after strike, whose radar networks have been rebuilt and struck again, whose command and communication nodes have been systematically targeted. Extraordinary security measures are only as strong as the infrastructure underneath them. Now let's add the other dimension that makes July 9 something beyond a military threat calculation, the internal dimension. A 32-year-old Iranian woman whose brother was killed during anti-government protest told reporters that even in the Ayatollah's death, he still causes her torment. Many Iranians have argued with their own families about how to feel about this funeral. Government loyalists and those who've suffered under the regime and able to find common ground. Iran is not a unified country marching solemnly toward Mashhad. It's a deeply fractured society holding millions of open wounds from the December and January anti-government protests, where thousands died under a government crackdown, layered on top of 4 months of war damage, surging inflation, and a collapsing rail. The regime is calling on every Iranian, regardless of ethnicity, religion, or political affiliation, to show up. What they will actually get is a crowd of millions in which a significant portion of people are there for reasons the regime would prefer not to examine too closely. Hardline conservatives within the regime have vowed to resist further diplomacy until Mojtaba Khomeini appears in public or produces a voice recording, and have called for the prosecution and even the death of Iranian negotiators from the pragmatist wing. So the internal fight over who actually runs Iran, the negotiators who signed the memorandum with the United States, or the hardliners who view that memorandum as surrender, is playing out in real time underneath the choreography of this state funeral. The funeral is supposed to project unity. Underneath it, there's a factional war about the soul of the Islamic Republic being fought in the corridors of power while the casket is still moving. Mojtaba Khomeini himself has said he holds a different view than Iran's elected president on the June memorandum, even as he allowed the signing to proceed after receiving assurances from the president. That's not unity. That's a supreme leader and a president of the same government publicly expressing divergent positions on their country's most significant diplomatic agreement in a generation, while the supreme leader in question can't even leave his safe house to attend his own father's burial. Here's the nuclear thread that sits underneath all of this, and it's the one that should make everything else feel more urgent. The IAEA's standing figures show approximately 440.9 kilograms of uranium, enriched to 60%. That is sufficient for approximately 10 nuclear weapons if further enriched to the 90% weapons minus grade threshold. That material is sitting in underground storage at the Esfand Tunnel complex, and satellite imagery from early June showed truck movement consistent with highly enriched uranium being moved into that complex. The IREI wants to inspect it. Iran's position, maintained through the Doha technical talks that wrapped up just days ago, is that inspections come only after a final deal is signed, not before. Mojtaba Khomeini reportedly issued a directive that Iran's enriched uranium should not be sent abroad, a position directly at odds with what the United States says it needs from any final agreement. And earlier this year, before the June memorandum was signed, Iran explicitly threatened to push enrichment to 90% weapons minus grade and permanently expel international nuclear inspectors if it came under military attack again. Trump has described the ceasefire as on massive life support. And Iran has approximately 440 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60%, which his own special envoy acknowledged could be upgraded to weapons minus grade material within 1 to 2 weeks using Iran's surviving centrifuge capacity. 1 to 2 weeks. That's not a distant theoretical. That's a decision and a technical process, not a construction project. So here's the actual geometry of this moment. If anything goes wrong on July 9, if the strike hits the Iranian territory, if chaos breaks out in Mashhad, if the security bubble ruptures in any direction, Iran's hardliners have both the motivation and the material to push immediately toward a nuclear threshold that changes every calculation in this conflict. Permanently. To right now, the people arguing most loudly inside Iran for exactly that option, the IRGC commanders. The hardline conservatives who've been threatening the regime's own negotiators are the ones who benefit most from a disruption of the barrier that makes continued negotiation politically impossible. For senior Iran officials cited by the New York Times, said Mojtaba Khomeini's continued absence from public view has already triggered serious concern about the sustainability of his rule. The hardliners want him to show his face. The security apparatus won't allow it. The pragmatists want negotiations to continue. The hardliners are threatening the negotiators. And the whole thing is supposed to look from the outside like a unified Islamic republic confidently bearing its martyred leader and transitioning power to the next generation. The expert framing of this entire event from a Chatham House director is that it is a tightly choreographed display of mourning, continuity and regime control. Tightly choreographed, which means it is a performance. And the most dangerous thing about a performance is what happens when something goes wrong that isn't in the script. Iran itself is clearly thinking about this. The regime is explicitly concerned about avoiding another tragedy like the 2020 funeral of Qasem Soleimani, which resulted in a fatal crowd crush killing dozens of people. That was in peacetime, under normal security conditions, without an active war, without a leadership that's been targeted repeatedly, without millions of people who have just spent for months watching their country get bombed. Managing crowd flow for a ceremony that could draw millions in Mashhad in July heat, in a city that's simultaneously the holiest site in Iran, the most watched city on earth for the next 72 hours, is not a small operational problem. It's the kind of problem where one failure cascades into catastrophe faster than any security protocol can absorb it. And then there's the Doha talks question. Because the timing of all of this against the diplomatic backdrop is not coincidental. The technical talks in Doha that just concluded after 2 days produced implementation steps, including an arrangement to use part of the $6 billion in Iranian assets held in Qatar for goods delivery, plus a communications mechanism to flag violations, but produced no breakthrough on the core disputes. Iran paused direct diplomacy with the United States for the duration of the funeral period, which means the negotiating table is empty right now, at exactly the moment the internal factional fight in Tehran is most intense, and the external threat of something going wrong on July 9 is highest. The Nuclear Affairs Working Group, one of four established at the technical round in Doha, remains the venue for the disputed III inspection question, with an Iranian diplomat insisting any IAEA visit comes only after a final deal, while the agency itself insists the interim accord already requires Iranian nuclear activities to be supervised. That dispute isn't resolved. It's paused, sitting in a working group, while the man who reportedly told Iran's government not to ship the enriched uranium abroad is simultaneously trying to attend his father's funeral from a safe house somewhere in the country. Here's what you need to watch specifically over the next 72 hours. Not the official statements. Not the state television coverage. 3 specific signals that will tell you more about where this actually goes than anything either government says publicly. Signal 1: watch whether Mojtaba Khomeini appears in Mashhad. Not in a written statement. In person. Physically present. Visible. Speaking or performing funeral rites. Because if he appears, that's the regime betting its security is strong enough to take the risk. And it's a bet that the nuclear deterrence threat hanging over anyone who might target the burial is credible. If he doesn't appear, the legitimacy question about who is actually running Iran doesn't go away when the cameras leave Mashhad. It gets louder, and louder means the hardliners pressing him to show himself get more leverage over the negotiations he's supposedly directing. Signal to watch the crowd dynamics in Mashhad. Specifically, whether the size and composition of the crowd matches what the regime is projecting, because of smaller minus than minus expected turnout, or visible signs of protest among the crowd at a funeral that the entire government has staked its post-minus war narrative on, tells you something critical about the regime's actual domestic position that no poll or official press release can tell you. Signal 3 watched the Strait of Hormuz over the same period. As of July, the central deepwater channel through the strait remained effectively closed, pending the clearance of an estimated 80 naval mines. UK and France have deployed mine countermeasures assets, but removal of the sophisticated mines will require months. A return to drone strikes on commercial shipping while the funeral is underway would be the clearest possible signal that the IRGC commanders and hardliners who've been pushing the regime's aggressive straight posture, operating independently of whatever diplomatic restraint the pragmatist wing is trying to maintain. It would be the IRGC telling both the negotiators in Doha and the mourners in Mashhad simultaneously that they don't answer to anyone sitting at a negotiating table. When the sun sets over the golden dome of the Imam Reza Shrine on July 9, one of a few things will have happened. Scenario 1: the regime will have successfully staged a transition of power under the noses of its most capable adversaries, with millions of Iranians in the streets, and a new supreme leader's authority, even if unspoken and invisible, reinforced by the sheer scale of public participation. The ceasefire will hold through the burial, the diplomatic pause will end, and the Doha talks will resume with the nuclear working group still unresolved, but at least still meeting. Scenario 2: something disrupts it. A strike, a crowd tragedy, a hardliner move against the negotiators, an IRGC drone that goes up while the world is watching Mashhad. But if that happens, the 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium sitting in underground storage at Esfahan doesn't stay at 60% forever. The question nobody in any briefing room is willing to answer out loud right now is simple: how confident is anyone in Tel Aviv, in Washington, in Tehran, in Moscow that July 9 goes according to the script? Because tightly choreographed performances in the middle of active conflicts, with a ghost supreme leader, a fractured government, millions of grieving and angry people in summer heat, and the world's most sophisticated military surveillance apparatus watching from above, have a way of not going according to anyone's script at all. The funeral will end, but the crises will not. And the question Iran's leadership cannot answer is how long the system can hold when it is under pressure from every direction at once. If you made it this far, you're the kind of viewer who wants the real picture, not the headlines, but what's actually happening beneath them. Hit that like button. Drop a comment with your take on what happens next. And if you haven't already, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.